Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 371. This is our next to last week of class, actually. So we're moving along here. This is the only lecture for the week. The other two videos were things already on YouTube. So let's jump to it. I'm calling this presentation A Tale of Two Dictators, with my apologies to Dickens there, of course. And what we're going to look at here in, well, it might be 15 minutes. You know me, it's probably going to be closer to 20 as I gas on about things. But anyway, what we're going to look at here, if I can get this to advance, I always have problems with this initially for some reason. I'm not sure why. There we go. What we're going to look at are two individuals. Yoweri Museveni of Uganda, who was we'll call him president. He was in charge of Uganda from 1986 to the present. That's right, 36 years. And Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia, who was in power from 1994 to 2017. A mere 24 years, if I do the math right. I may not have done the math right. So 17 and 6, 23 years. Okay, yeah, that's nothing, right? Okay, so let's look at these in order here. So let's look at Museveni first. So he came to power in Uganda, which is in East Central Africa here, typically bordering what we consider to be East Africa and Central Africa. Obviously, those dividing lines are pretty loose. In the Great Lakes area, anyway. As you see Lake Victoria there and Lake Tanganyika on the map. And Uganda is something of a regional power. And this comes through, I think, what you see, and they watch that video on the war, Africa's World War in the DRC, as well as in Schmidt's article for the week, where she talks about issues in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Somalia, as well as DRC. Uganda was involved in all of those. Long-time conflicts with Sudan, when the African Union sent peacekeeping troops to Somalia, a large contingent of those were Ugandan troops. So it's been something of a regional power broker in the Museveni period. So what was the Museveni period? Well, Museveni comes to power in 1986, and he's the head of the National Resistance Army, which was a rebel movement. First emerged under Amin, and then Amin's successor, Milton Obote. So he's fought, as he says, in the bush, okay? His time in the bush, probably close to a decade in the bush. Gaining power, gaining followers, until finally strong enough in 86 to overthrow the government. And then the National Resistance Army, which kind of remakes itself as a political organization called the National Resistance Movement, the NRM, takes power in 86, and he serves as a military government until 96. And what you see happening here, and what Reed mentions and Schmidt mentions and so on, is the end of the Cold War. During the Cold War, we, the United States, were quite happy to have military dictators across Africa if they were on our side. And Museveni was. So there was no real pressure on him during that period. But by the end of the Cold War, there's a sort of a global movement toward democratization. And so what you'll see is Jammeh and Museveni here, Jammeh being our second example, both hold elections in 96, primarily due to outside pressure. The U.S. says, hey, you know what, enough of these military dictatorships, you got to have an election. Well, in both cases, what they do is they take off their uniform, put on a suit, and then run for office as president. Matter of fact, I think we have a picture of that. Here we go. There we go. So you got Museveni there as the Bush soldier there on one side, and then Museveni as the president on the other side, right? So these guys generally, as I said, take off the uniform, put on a suit, run for office, and they never lose. Literally, they never lose. Okay, so Museveni then wins his first election in '96, wins his second election in 2001, and this is supposed to be his final term in office, because the Constitution says 2 5-year terms. Okay, so that's it, right? Well, no, it's not. Okay, because what does he do? Well, before the next election, which should come around in 2006, he changes the Constitution. So he eliminates term limits so he can continue to run. And then he continues to run. 2006, he wins a third term. 2011, a fourth term. 2016, a fifth term. None of these elections are considered to be free and fair. Okay, there are a lot of attacks on and restrictions on the opposition, including security forces breaking up election rallies, killing people, some targeted assassinations, and so on. So it's not a free and open democratic environment by any stretch of the imagination. So by 2016, as I said, he wins a fifth term in office. And that should have been his last term. Not only, well, they got rid of the term limits, but there also in the Constitution was an age restriction. Presidential candidates couldn't be more than 75 years old. And by the next election, he will be 77. So what does he do? Changes the Constitution again, right? Removes that age limit, but then also reintroduces term limits. But they're not retroactive. Okay, so it's just starting now. Right? So this is in 2018, reintroduces 2 term limits, but extends the terms also from 5 years to 7 years. So he wins election again in 2021, being his 6th term in office at age 77. So let's see here. He could do, if he survives, he could from that point on do another 14 years. Which would give him, well, it's 36, 46. It would give him 50 years in power. But let's see here. He was 77, so 87, he'd be 91. Could he pull it off? He might. We'll see. The other thing that we see is, by and by, is it's popularly believed that he's grooming his son to replace him. His son is a military officer. He's the head of the Presidential Guard and so on. But so he's creating, well, kind of like a number of these families do, a family tradition here. Kind of like, well, we got the Bushes in the U.S. You've got the Kenyatta family in Kenya. We had Idris Deby in Chad, who was, I believe he was overthrown, and then was he died? I can't remember. I have to look that up. But his son was put in power anyway after him, illegally. There's no election. Just the military said, he's in charge. Anyway, so there's the situation of Museveni of Uganda. It's sort of a classic military dictator who becomes president for life, right? And relies on the military and security establishment then to keep him in power. Another example then is going to be Jammeh of Gambia. And I'm choosing these 2 examples. I could have chosen others, but I'm choosing these 2 examples because actually Uganda and Gambia are the 2 countries in Africa where I've spent the most time. I lived in Uganda in '92 during Museveni's reign when it was still a military government. That was interesting. And I was in Gambia twice, 2008, 2009 under Jammeh, when he was technically had been elected president, but it was still a military government. Okay, let's be honest about that. Okay, so Jammeh and the Gambia, and this is a map of West Africa here, just so you can see. Gambia is, other than this Atlantic coastline, totally surrounded by the country of Senegal. Not frankly unique in Africa. We have Lesotho, which is totally surrounded by South Africa. So, but this geography is going to become important here by the end of the story, though. And Gambia is the smallest country on the continent, arguably the poorest country on the continent. I showed you in a lecture, previous lecture 2 weeks ago, some of the statistics from the UNDP. And then also the CIA World Fact Book. If you look up Gambia, you look up resources and so on, what are you going to see? Nothing. Fish and sand. Literally, it lists sand as one of the resources. Okay, that's what they have. It is a very small, poor country. A lot of what's transpired there really seems to correspond well with Bates's analysis from his book, frankly. Anyway, so you had Gambia getting its independence in 1965. And you had a president who came to power in 65, who won re-election, well, a number of times, basically in office for about 20 years, I guess, until Jammeh then holds a coup. On 22nd of July, 1994, he leads a coup which takes over the government. The U.S. was not involved in the coup. We were not in favor of it, but we actually unwittingly facilitated it. As it turned out, Jammeh at the time was a lieutenant in the Gambian army, and the Gambian army was holding joint exercises with the U.S. military. So the Gambian army used, or this faction of them who led the coup, used access to the U.S. military equipment that they were given for these joint exercises to overthrow the government. So, oops, our bad. Anyway, so he overthrows the government in 94. But once again, this is after the Cold War. So we're, the global environment's souring on military dictators. So what does he do? He's pressured in 96, once again, same year as Museveni in Uganda. He's pressured to hold elections. And what does he do? Takes off the uniform. Well, actually, first he promotes himself. He was a lieutenant, and he promotes himself to initially, I think, to colonel, and then I think general. Yeah. So then he takes off the uniform, probably getting a military pension also, and puts on a suit and runs for election, which he wins. Shocking, I know. So he holds an election in 96, another election in 2001, another election in 2006, another election in 2011. I'm sure you saw this coming. There were term limits, then there's no term limits. And none of these elections are free and fair. Repression against the opposition, journalists being killed, newspapers, radio being closed down, just a repressive environment. Kind of like the sort of, same sort of dictator playbook that these guys all pursue here. Anyway, so he wins election then in 2011, and the next election coming up is in 2016. Here's Jammeh, by the way. As I said, it's a civilian government, but it's really not, okay? And he has no problem in crossing the line between rule and politics, kind of like Trump did in holding an election rally on the White House grounds, something that never happened before. Well, that's kind of what we have here. This is a sign I took a picture of, or an election sign, obviously. But this is on the National Mall. This is on government land. Okay? This is like if you were in D.C. and put an election billboard up on the National Mall in front of the Smithsonian or something. That's what this is. Similarly, this one right here. Okay, Peace and Prosperity, the APRC, that's his party. His Excellency Al-Haji Dr. Yahya Ajj Jammeh. The doctor was honorary, that's a joke. Anyway, but as you can see from the sign in the background, this is on the grounds, this is on government land. This is on the grounds of the National Botanic Gardens. There actually was an identical sign in front of a military base in the capital, Banjul, that I was going to take a picture of, but I couldn't because you don't take pictures of military bases in Africa, okay? The security services will grab you. So I took this one instead, but it's the same thing. The sign, same sign on a military base is sending a somewhat unsubtle message that the military is behind this guy, okay? Yeah. So what happens? So then we have an election in 2016, and he loses. He loses the election. Shocking to everybody. And so what does he do then? Concede the election. And I got a couple of short video clips of this. I want to show you here. I know I'm going to go over a little over 20 minutes here, but I'm showing video, so that's okay, right? Okay, let me get this set up. This is on YouTube. The links are in there too. We don't have sound. Hold on here. Oh, we got sound there.
The month of July 1994. Today, Friday, the 2nd of December.
Oh, this is the first time I tried to do this in this.
You Gambians have decided
it's not working. Well, you know what? I'm going to post the links. I'm sorry, I lost you there for a minute. I tried to show the video and then this recording stopped. I was going to show you 3 short video clips. They don't seem to be working here. So what I'm going to do instead is I will post those on D2L so you can watch them yourself. But it's really fascinating because what happens with Jammeh is he loses the election in 2016. And so what does he do? Well, he concedes, and you can watch the video yourself, and he's conciliatory. I'm going to work with my opponent, da-da-da-da, right? Okay, and it all looks like a peaceful transfer of power, okay? But then a few days later, he takes it back. He says, and you got to watch the video. They're only like a minute and a half long, but you just look at his expression. It's just, it's priceless, and it tells a lot. But he says, I conceded, but then he comes back and says, oh, I found out there's irregularities, this isn't right. So I want to make sure each and every vote is counted. Who does this sound like? Anyway, so he throws out the election results. It says, we're going to have a new election, And normally, once again, across Africa, when a military dictator, even in a presidential suit, says something like that, that's what happens. But you know what? That's not what happened here. So what happens is the rest of West Africa says, no, you're not. Now, Schmidt has some pretty harsh things to say about ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. It's kind of like regional UN. It's a regional organization for West African states. It says economic community, but it's becoming more of a larger than that, including having a military component. And so they send in diplomats, they send in presidents from other countries, and they start trying to use diplomacy and negotiate with Jammeh and say, hey, you lost the election. Maybe you should step down. Maybe you should go. And he's like, no, I'm going to hold on. And the generals come out and say, we're going to fight to the end. And then ECOWAS says, no, you're not. And they send in troops. ECOWAS sends in troops, Senegalese and Nigerian troops. And they force him out of the country. And then they swear in his opponent, Adama Barrow, the guy that won the election. This has never happened before across West Africa. So, in part I wanted to tell you this because it's sort of a sign of hope, right? I gotta say, Reed and Schmidt, it's pretty dour reading. It's looking like there's not a whole lot, positive in the future there. But this is. Now, let's temper with a little bit of reality. And this is where we go back to the map here to show you. Gambia is the small, poor country, and as you got to imagine, not a very large or well-equipped army. It's surrounded by Senegal. So Senegal can very easily send in troops. The Nigerian Navy came over and goes right up the Gambian River, right? Okay? because you can send ships right up the river there. So, logistically, this is an easy thing to do, and the opposition is not going to be strong. Okay, so was it a principled stand by ECOWAS? Absolutely. The guy lost the election; he wasn't giving it up. Get him out of there. But also, it was a fairly easy call. There were no shots fired here. There really was no bloodshed. They just did this show of force, and he and his generals and so on all stepped down and pretty much fled the country. So would this happen if it were a coup in Nigeria, the largest country in West Africa? Probably not. In the same way that, we're not seeing a whole lot of people standing up to Russia militarily, right? Who's sending in troops to help Ukraine right now? Well, no one, because Russia has nuclear weapons. Gambia doesn't. Gambia didn't have much of anything. Okay, so it's a principled stand, but it's one that, in the sense of realpolitik, was also easy to do. Is this a portend for the future? Well, hopefully it is. But we've seen a number of coups since 2016 across West Africa with no real sense of anybody stepping up to throw those guys out. So, the historian in me says maybe. We're not very good at prognostication, frankly, because we all look backwards. But, it's one of these that remains to be seen. Anyway, but I wanted to tell you that story. We'll see if that's the exception that proves the rule or a trend of something to come. Okay? Thank you very much.